Okay, let's take a closer look now at how the real estate could impact this all-important upcoming presidential race. Joining us to talk more about this, Ken Johnson of the Walker family, chair of real estate at the University of Mississippi, and also a real estate economist. Ken, good to see you again.
Glad to be with you, Sean.
Okay, let's take stock of where we are and what experts are saying about housing prices. They are still going up, but not as much as they had been a year ago and earlier this year. Now, despite the Fed slowly lowering rates after years, it's more expensive right now to finance a new home than it was over the past few months. Now, from a consumer standpoint, tell us where we are.
Sure. So housing, we're at the peak of a housing cycle, both on the rent side and the home ownership side. The issue right now is the number of units that are available. The proximate cause of this is we just don't have enough units for the people that are in demand for units. So households typically have about 2.5, 2.6 people per household per unit, and that number now is pressing even higher to 2.7, 2.8, and that's because, again, of the shortage of units, both for ownership and for rent across the country.
Okay, and it comes back to the question Donald Trump has been asking his fanatical base at every gathering he has: are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? But is what he's asking seems to be a wild oversimplification. His administration says that saw the national debt balloon and arguably saddled the Biden administration with skyrocketing inflation. So for homeowners, what are they looking at in this race? How are they looking at these two candidates?
Both candidates are making promises that are not really very realistic, because of the truth of the matter is, for housing units, the number of units we have, for home prices, for apartment rents, that's managed far more at a local, at a county, at a municipal level. State and federal governments have very little influence on the number of units that can be built. That's done at the state and local level. Now, of course, state politicians, at federal level, people running for president are going to make promises, but none of the promises made so far are very realistic and don't have any short-term solutions in them.
Interesting. Okay, to talk more about the way it is, it's regional and it's all over the place. New York dealing with the highest jump in home prices, Denver the lowest. So regionally, how do you attack this as one solid problem?
Well, you don't, because it's different in different parts of the country. In the U.S., there's massive migration into the Sun Belt states. That's where the housing unit shortage is the most dramatic. How you address housing issues in the Sun Belt states are much different than how you will address them, say, in the Northeast or the Midwest, where you tend to have populations departing that area of the country. The movement is slow, but the trend is there, and it's definitely growing. But again, the solution is simply to build more units, and in particular, in the parts of the country that we call the Sun Belt states. Mm-hmm. That's running from the southeastern U.S. all the way out west, and some, depending on whom you ask, up into Colorado.
Okay, so what has Harris proposed to improve the state of housing? And we heard Trump just a minute ago talk about this, that he wants to dramatically lower interest rates. Is that even possible? And is there going to be a point that you believe, if maybe not in the too terribly distant future, that there is a kind of break in the dam and things are better? Will there be new homes out there for people who want to get them? Will they be affordable?
The short answer is yes, there will. Housing moves in a cycle. Rents move in a cycle. This particular cycle, we're at the peak of both the rental cycle and the housing cycle. So things are at their most expensive. It's most expensive to build units now. The labor's most expensive, the material's most expensive, and the land is most expensive. When you solve housing crises is years before they start, because you want to be into building units, necessary units, when you're at the bottom of the housing cycle. So really the time to have solved this particular problem, we didn't know it then, but the bottom of the cycle was around circa 2012 and 13. Land is at its least expensive point, materials and labor at their least expensive point. So it's not that we can't do anything right now, but we shouldn't see this as doom and gloom. We've been here many times before. This has happened before.
Right.
We will not have a housing crash in prices this time, but we will be talking about affordability for some number of months and years ahead as we build enough units for us to live in.
Ken, is there one candidate who you believe has the upper leg in addressing these issues?
No, because again, presidents can make promises, but there's very little. The Oval Office, Congress, Senate, or the House, the Senate, even state governments have a very difficult time controlling the number of units that are being built. This is a very localized county and municipal problem that has to be addressed. Probably one of our biggest problems is NIMBYism, where not in my backyard has really affected our local politicians and their willingness to provide units.
Okay, so you talked about renting. A lot of people are out there renting right now that don't want to. How do we, as a nation, attack this issue?
Sure. So the American dream of home ownership is not dead, but then you've got to sit down and say, well, why do you have that dream of home ownership? And the real issue is we want to see wealth creation, and historically, home ownership has been a significant contributor in developing and creating wealth for middle-class America. But what's true, if you look at a comparison of renting and reinvesting and home ownership in terms of wealth and wealth creation, renting and reinvesting monies that you would otherwise put into home ownership outperforms owning and building equity in terms of wealth creation on average. Not by much, though. So really the solution is, if rents are better in your city, perhaps you should be renting and reinvesting. If home prices are a little better, such as one of the better buys in the country right now is New Orleans, Louisiana, so you want to maybe be buying there to build a little bit more equity. What you should not be doing is renting and not reinvesting monies that you would have otherwise put into home ownership. That's wealth destroying.